You're listening to Advice from Your Advocates, a show where we provide elder law advice to professionals who work with the elderly and their families.
Welcome back to Advice from Your Advocates. I'm Bob Mannor. I'm a board-certified elder law attorney in Michigan, and we have the fortune today to have a local care provider of home care. We've got Lydia White, co-owner and client care director of Comfort Keepers, that covers the communities of Bloomfield Hills, Farmington Hills, Howell, and Rochester Hills. What's unique about Lydia, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about herself, but what's unique is that she is a certified champion teacher for Teepa Snow's positive approach to care. So many of you have heard that name before, Teepa Snow. She's kind of a legend in long-term care, and specifically she's a legend in dementia care. So we're going to get into that. And she's also a certified dementia practitioner. And many of you know that we are a certified dementia practitioner. I don't know how you say it. Teachers, we help people get their certified dementia practitioner credentials by. Welcome, Lydia.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to be here.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself? I know I kind of already stole your thunder of telling them really great stuff about you, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I appreciate that. So yes, I am the co-owner of Comfort Keepers. We cover almost 1,000 square miles between the locations of Howell and Rochester, all the way up to Pontiac, all the way to Livonia, and all the way out the 96 corridor to Howell and Brighton and those locations. So we have a large footprint.
So I want to, let's get into this a little bit about Comfort Keepers, because one of the things that I think is really important is, Comfort Keepers provides that hour-to-hour care that is necessary in many, many cases. And so when somebody's in the healthcare setting and they're in the hospital or they're talking to their doctor, often they'll say, and I had a family come in just the other day, and they were told they'd get home care. And I have social workers in my office, and they refer to this as home care. And when it's home care covered by Medicare, it's very, very limited in the number of hours. It might be a nurse coming by for a half hour to an hour a week. It might be a physical therapist or even a social worker, but it's very limited hours. And what you provide is what really is necessary, if my understanding is correct, which is somebody to be there to help somebody get out of bed in the morning, to help get dressed, to help them get showered, help them get to the bathroom, all those types of things.
Absolutely. And you bring up a very important topic. So the hospital discharge process is really designed to ensure that the patient is medically stable, right? That they meet these markers, that their blood counts and things like this are all up to speed, and the doctor ultimately decides when it's time to go based on those medical markers. Then they are discharged home. Sometimes they're by themselves.
Right.
Sometimes they don't have any support, and they're sent home with a whole bunch of pieces of paper called a discharge plan that the nurse goes over, but if you've got somebody that's hard of hearing, that has dementia, or that generally is overwhelmed and stressed out for being in the hospital, they may not catch all the detail. So that's where we come in, and we actually will talk with the discharge planners, with the nurses. And I strongly encourage family members to go into the hospital and definitely be there when they're discharging and going over all the necessary information.
I'm going to take that to a whole nother level, because I was in the hospital when I was about 40 years old. That was a while ago. I'm not close to 40 anymore, but when I was about 40, I got admitted to the hospital for one night. And my discharge I had the same experience that you're just describing. And I was, so a couple things. First of all, I was 40 years old, fully cognizant, didn't have any hearing issues, was a highly educated professional that works with people in the long-term care industry. It was still overwhelming. And not only was it overwhelming for this discharge, but I also ended up leaving with 2 prescriptions that if I had slightly less knowledge than I did, I would not have realized that it was a double dose of the same prescription. They used different, one was the generic and one was the the not generic. And so, but, hopefully the pharmacist would have picked that up, but who knows, And so had I not known because one doctor gave me one prescription and a different doctor gave me another prescription. It was the same prescription. And so it could have been very, very dangerous. That was me at 40 as a highly educated professional that works in the long-term care industry. And can you imagine if you're 90
Oh,
and
yeah.
have some memory issues?
Absolutely. And I think another thing to remember is that they're doing the best they can with what they
Right.
have.
Right.
They're limited by insurance. Insurance runs out at 21 days, whatever it is, and they're limited by that particular process. And then it's like you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, right? You
Right.
have to go home. And when they come home, that's what Comfort Keepers does
Right.
is I also we as a business have worked really hard to become a partner. We call ourselves care partners. So we're willing to help the family out with some of that organization. I actually have a client that we're still working with today that I met him and his nephew at a rehabilitation center 4 years ago. And he unfortunately lived alone and he had had a major medical event, ended up in the hospital in ICU. He was very sick. And he has a lot of chronic conditions, but he's on the younger side, and his family said, "We want to bring him home, but I want you guys to do everything." He's got pets. He needs help getting to and from doctor's appointments. He has a number of different conditions. His house needs a little bit of help. He was really suffering. He had lost his wife about 2 months before that. And it
No.
really, once all that happened, we were able to, his family kind of stepped away and said, he's not really able to take care of himself. So we came in and I said, we'll do everything. We'll do
Nice.
basically case management. We'll make sure that he gets where he needs to go. I hired a nurse to do the medication management. And we have a strong team of caregivers there that are there around the clock that help him with everything, including if contractors come to the door looking for work, they will help,
Or
kind of
scammers, right?
vet them. Yeah, I was trying to be generous there, but to vet them out and make sure that we're understanding what's going on. We have access to electronic notes and the caregivers, always give us updates on that. And as a result, he is thriving at home. And I think that's really what drives me.
Right.
Is watching this guy go from really not getting off of his couch, not being able to get to the bathroom, to I want to go volunteer at the Humane Society.
Wow.
It's amazing.
That is
So.
amazing. You had mentioned something about making sure he gets to his appointments, like his doctor's appointments. Is that something that you can do? I actually don't know the answer to this question. Are you able to arrange transportation and things like that and go with your clients to their doctor's appointments and such?
Absolutely. And we have a lot of different cases where, for example, folks with Parkinson's might go to like what they call a boxing class. They have special boxing classes for Parkinson's people. And we go to those. We actually will participate in the exercise, bring them home, take them to physical therapy if needed. We can also help them with their physical therapy at home. All of those things we believe that care is a relationship, not a task. So
Right.
we're going to meet them where they're at and figure out with the family, of course, what's the best possible way forward. I personally, the reason why I do this is manyfold. It's professional and personal. My grandmother had 11 children. She grew up in a small town. She lived right across the street from a church where she helped the priest with different things and social activities. And that was her purpose in life after all of her kids were gone. She had over 50 grandchildren. And we started noticing some issues, and my uncles and aunts didn't know what to do because they're at, 1998, there really weren't a lot of choices.
Right.
So they put her in a nursing home. I didn't get to see her very often, but when I did, she was just kind of a shell of herself. They did not have the skills that they have now, which is why Teepa Snow, to bring that back, was so important to me, because she gave me personally and many others the skills to be able to work with people with dementia and connect with them first before we try to do anything. And if my grandmother would have had that, she probably could have stayed home at least a few more years and had a better quality of life. And my other grandmother as well passed away from cancer. And I don't believe she had a lot of help at her home either. So what we do is very important. And it's also important to the families. So the families can just be a daughter or a son,
Right.
and they can just enjoy time with their family. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I want to get a little deeper into the Teepa Snow education that you've gotten, which I'm really curious about. But you said something there that I want to explore a little bit further. You said caregiving is a relationship, not a task. I think that's such an important statement. And and I think that some people will hear that and say, oh, that's just a slogan or whatever. I think that that is a very real scenario where if it's a task and the person you're caring for is cold, you might come up behind them and put a blanket on them.
Mhm.
And because they're not fully understanding their surroundings, that may seem like an attack on them.
Mhm.
And so if you're doing the task, then that might put that person in a state of aggravation and really kind of ruin the rest of the night. Whereas if it's a relationship, you come around to the front, you get
Mhm.
down on your knee and you talk to the person and say, are you cold? Can I put this blanket on you? And then it becomes a very positive experience. People talk about sundowners, and I get that that's a real thing. I'm not saying it's not, but part of it is because of having to go all day, lacking the ability to fully understand the things around you. So if we can really be careful about trying to connect the person with their surroundings and not just do tasks, but really have a relationship and get down on their level, speak to them eye to eye, speak slowly, things like that. I think that would really help with those kind of sundowners and aggravation or behavior issues.
Absolutely. And I think the key with Teepa's positive approach to care is that we become skilled in connecting with those living with dementia so that it makes their lives easier. And it also helps with caregiver burnout, whether it's a
Yeah,
family caregiver, professional caregiver. We have all kinds of examples of caregivers connecting directly with somebody and them lighting up when they see the caregiver come. They may not remember their name,
right,
but they light up because they know that person treats me well. I remember that part. We always remember how people make us feel. And so
right,
with us, we try to focus on that type of care with our training, with our caregivers. They all have to go through some Teepa Snow online training, and we're going to be rolling out some additional certification training as well. It is so important to me that that's why I got the certification and roll it out to our teams. I also am so passionate about this. I'm currently in nursing school. It was on my bucket list. So I have a unique perspective of doing clinicals in some of the major hospitals around here. And then also, what's really funny, and obviously we can't talk about names or anything, but I ran into an older client that we used to care for in the hospital as a
mm,
nursing student. And it was very interesting to talk with him and see how he was doing and to know that the nurses are doing their very best. It's not about the nursing, it's they only have so much time.
right,
And I watched several different people do the discharge paperwork with the patient. And the patient was so stressed out because they wanted to leave the hospital that they weren't listening.
mm,
It's not that they were being rude or it's not that the nurse was rushing them. It's just, like you said, the communication is not there. They really needed someone. I said, do you live with anybody at the house? And she said, no. And I said, it would be nice to have someone there to help you go through those things. And my hope with my nursing degree is to help with more specific medication management because I see a lot of mistakes made there that can cause a lot of problems or doubling up on medication because they don't
right.
understand or they forget. Highly recommend the pill boxes, the daily reminders. I
Yeah.
can't stress that enough.
Even if it is a caregiver, you still want to set those out that way just because caregiver can make mistakes too. So,
Right. Right.
you said someone with dementia can still perceive caring or relationship.
Mhm.
And I think that's very true. We had somebody from the Alzheimer's Association come and talk to us at our law office, and they talked about how that, and I'm not going to get the percentages exactly right, but at least 90% of communication is not verbal. And
Right.
that's for somebody that doesn't have dementia.
Right.
And so it is, and I fully believe this is true. A lot of it is tone, a
Mhm.
lot of it is body language, a lot of it is facial expression. And so it's very difficult for people to fully hear the words. This is where Occasionally you'll hear about, certain limitations about being able to fully understand nuance or people's emotions, and how that they're not always perceived well, which is unfortunate because, they're probably well intentioned, but they're not able to do the body language and really perception that others do.
Mhm.
And I think this is particularly important for when someone has dementia. I've told this story many times, but I think it's just a really relevant and true story to kind of help people understand it really is important about how you approach, how you interact. You can't just do the task. And so it's really important about how the person perceives you, because they're not able to, especially with somebody with dementia,
Mhm.
they're not able to fully understand the words. They're not able to fully understand even the actions. Sometimes the
Mhm.
actions, it has to be those nuances, that body language, the facial
Mhm.
expressions, those types of things. And so when my, mom was with us, I would get calls, and my siblings would also get calls, and she would call us to tell us that there was a man in the house. And
Mhm.
she was very calm about it. And so, and that's not, that would not, if there had been previous years, if there was a strange man in the house, she would not be calm about this. This was not something that, but she was very calm. And she's like, I know that he's a good man and he's well intentioned. And sometimes she would say, I think he might be working on the road down the street. And he just came in. She grew up in Flint. So I think maybe that
Mhm.
was where, like, there was always workers down the street. I don't know where she got the worker down the street thing, but she was never afraid. She
Right.
was, oh, and it was my dad, obviously. The story
Right.
is that was my dad. And so, but she would call us, and each of us would get these calls sometimes, and it would be, there's a strange man in the house, but don't worry about it because he's a good man and he's
Mhm.
well intentioned and he cares about me. And I don't know who he is. And I think he might just be a worker that was, just came in off the street. It's like, that's not a thing that happens, but uh,
Right.
and so, but that's how important this is about the relationship part of the caregiving, about the body language, about
Mhm.
the intentionality of it. Is that someone, I've had lots of times where it was a married couple that they didn't recognize their spouse and they
Mhm.
got very angry, and it was, I can fully understand that when your
Mhm.
spouse doesn't recognize you, that feels pretty bad, right? That
Yeah.
that could be, you could be really offended by that because you've been married for 65 years. And
Right.
so, it's the approach of making sure somebody feels safe. And this is just a lesson to all caregivers, home caregivers, family caregivers, everybody
Mhm.
else. It really is that relationship over the task.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something to that. I've met with families when there's spouses in the mix. One has advanced dementia. We're talking like leaves, wanders away from the house,
Uh,
and is also has some we all come to this world with what we have, and we also have dynamics with all the beautiful people in our lives and our kids and our spouse, right? And that does not go away when we become ill. If anything, it might exasperate it. And so this particular woman had a lot of issues, and she basically would get really upset every time the husband would say, I'm leaving.
mm,
And I said, since she's there with the caregiver and she's safe and they're working on something at the table, maybe just go and come back if
right,
it's not a long trip, and not mention that it was something very small. And wouldn't you
right.
know, that actually turned the whole thing around where it just triggered her every time he left, because that was her safe zone. That was
Yeah.
her emotional connection. And I think one of the things that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, and one of the reasons I advocate for both caregivers and the clients are, they look to the caregiver for that emotional support. Even though it's not necessarily on the job description, we don't talk about it. But if that person's calm and that person is handling me right and with loving kindness, it's a little easier for me to get through my day. There's a lot of misunderstandings with dementia. There were misunderstandings with my grandmother. Towards the end of her life, she couldn't feed herself. And
Yeah.
now we know why, but I don't know if my family really understood that and why that was happening. It's the brain is dying, and the
Mm,
front part of the brain that has the discernment and the judgment that you and I might have is no longer there. And they're very impulsive live and can't follow normal procedures like brushing teeth. So
Right.
imagine going through life like that and getting emotionally upset and not being able to get out of it, and then everyone else around you is upset and stressed out. We owe it to people to try to do better
Right.
and to help them.
Absolutely. I'd like to get into a little bit more about this. You're a certified champion teacher
Mhm.
for Teepa Snow's positive approach to care. So, if you can tell us, for those listeners that don't know, a little bit about Teepa Snow and then a little bit about this program, the positive approach to care, and your role as a teacher in that program.
Sure, absolutely. So as part of the certification process, we have to do pre-work. We actually have to record ourselves teaching the principles, and the principles are mainly, it's called positive approach to care. It's also, you get in their eyesight, and people with dementia have limited visual processing. So you mentioned this earlier, Bob, you want to get right up, not in their face aggressively, but
Right.
within their eye contact. And then you want to say hello, and then, offer something like, I noticed you have Mickey Mouse earrings on, something like that. And then you want to offer your hand, because Teepa says one of the things that happens is that they keep automatic movements. And one of the automatic movements in the
Interesting.
Western community, civilization, I guess, is a handshake. Now,
Hmm.
obviously during COVID, that's probably not super great, but you stick out your hand and immediately other people stick out their hand.
Hmm.
And so that's one of the ways and then once you have their hand, they then have given you that physical permission to basically interact. There
Mm-hmm.
are times when they won't give you their hand, and that's okay. That's not about you, that's about them. And you have to
Mm-hmm.
find other ways. So that I went through a course of this, and then also we have to recertify every year with Teepa and her team. And that requires going out, and I've delivered this presentation over the course of, it's like a 3 or 4 hour presentation where it's interactive, and we do a lot of interactive activities, and we talk about the brain, what changes happen in the brain. We explain why people with dementia keep the opportunity. They don't lose swear words. They may have trouble on the left side of their brain, with processing language and comprehension and all these types of things. But on the other hand, they remember how to do a handshake. They remember music. They remember the pattern of speech, like a question, prayer, and they also remember swear words. So if you've ever been to a memory care unit, you know that there's not a lot of a filter sometimes in some of the things that come out of the mouth. So we learn all of that. And we also have hands-on training where we learn with groups of people. We discuss things. And I got to learn directly with Teepa. It was the coolest thing. And then we recertify, and basically what the training looks like is exactly the training I went through. And we learn how to, basically talk people through things, have them self-reflect on how they feel they did. And the whole idea behind Teepa's program is that you have to practice the skills to become good at the skills. It is less about being patient, and it is more about having the skills to connect with somebody who is in a stage in their life where they may or may not know what's going on, or they may or may not know who you are, even if they know you already.
Right.
All those different things. It was life-changing, and I always think about my grandmother when I do this, because I know that what she was going through are all the things Teepa talks about, and all the things that, she is an occupational therapist by trade, I guess, and a
Mhm.
researcher. So she understands the connection between, or the lack of connection between, the gray matter, the white matter in the brain. And if you notice, if you're talking to somebody that has dementia, give them like 3 seconds to process what you say. Keep
Right.
it simple, give them small choices. And those little things have helped, probably thousands and thousands of people like me learn how to connect with people that have dementia, and also help their families. As in the story that I just mentioned with the gentleman and his wife, it's important to be able to help the families. Nobody's doing anything wrong. We'd like to try to get away from that. And that is also Teepa's approach, that if you know better, you'll do better.
Yeah.
And these are skills you need to practice, which is why we talk about this a lot in the business. I believe the business is basically the hands and feet of the vision that we want. And our vision lines up very well with Teepa's as well, that positive approach to care, making sure people are cared for. Also, bringing the family along with us. And I
Right.
think one of the harder things I see is when families aren't lined up. And I get that. I have a brother. I don't know if we agree on things with my parents. And when we meet with the families, it's always good to remind the families to have an idea about who they want to be the go-to, who they want to be handle the legal things, the medical things, and then make sure we have a plan ahead of time. It causes a lot of stress and tension and sorrow when that plan is not put together first. And nobody wants to be dealing with anything, whether at the hospital with mom, and mom has to now come home or go to a facility within the span of 1 week.
Right.
It's super overwhelming.
You had mentioned something there about the 3 seconds. And so I don't have a timer here, but if I did, I might do that because, 3 seconds seems like it's such a short period of time. But if you're having a conversation with somebody and you ask them a question and then you have to wait for their response for 3 seconds with silence for 3 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like 3 minutes.
It does.
Is honestly, it's much harder if you've never done this where you just timed it out, where you ask a question and then you
Mhm.
hit the timer. I think human nature feels like we need to fill the silence. And that's the opposite of what someone with dementia needs. They are processing things a little bit slower. They might be able to come up with an articulate answer or somewhat answer, but you need to give them time. And maybe it's more than 3 seconds. The idea is to ask the question and then stay silent and not try to re-explain or ask another question. As soon
Mhm.
as now you're getting into a whole thing where in my previous life I was a courtroom attorney. And
Okay.
that was not allowed in court. You can't ask compound questions. You have to ask one question at a time. If you ask compound questions, so you ask a question, they don't respond right away, and you ask another question, which is what our human nature is.
Mhm.
That's an objection that the judge will sustain to say, no, you can't do that. You have to wait for your answer. And so it's difficult, even, with professional training.
Mhm.
The idea is if we want to encourage self-awareness and honestly even stall the aggression, the more we stimulate the brain and make them do their own thing. We went to Hokovic, which is that dementia village, and
Yeah.
they have activities during the day, partly because it stimulates their brain. They
Mhm.
go for walks, they help shop for groceries, they help fold the laundry, yes, they go and listen to music, they have little clubs that they go to. And these are not, so I think people, when they hear this is, oh, well, this is the people that are in early dementia. No, these are people in late dementia. You can't be in Hokovic until you're stage 5 dementia, which is pretty severe dementia. And they fill their days with activities and it stalls the progression of the disease. It allows for people to have not only longer life, but better quality of life during that time period.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things where, if we do everything for somebody, so if we ask them a question, they don't answer right away, and then we just answer for them, and then we don't include them in the conversation anymore, that's going to be a lesser quality of life for them.
Yes. And that skills piece goes along with, as we're working with someone that has dementia and they might take a little bit more time to process something, you're encouraging them and giving them a safe space for that dignity.
Yes,
They
dignity.
probably know what you're saying, but you can see it in their eyes where they're it takes them a minute to understand just because they can't help it. It would be the same thing if you had a heart condition. Their brain
Hmm.
is not working as well. We give them that dignity to answer as a human being and someone we love. We have to treat, we would hope that people that we love, we would treat that way, give them the space. Then you're creating that relationship. It's true, they may not remember every single thing and they may not understand the rationalization of it, which brings me to an important point. This is a Teepa saying, know your agenda and don't show your agenda.
Ah,
So for people like with what we do when we go out and help people in the home, I always say, know what you need to do. Let's say you need to get Mrs. Smith to a doctor's appointment and you also need to do a load of laundry before you leave. You need to know how to time manage that so we get her in the car at about 2:00. If you know it takes her 2 hours to get ready, get that started so that you're not rushing her and you're not stressing her out. And then we also elevate the caregiving role and job beyond a custodial type position. It's a skilled position. And I would love to see that more in my lifetime, where it's skilled and people actually have they're caring, they're heart-driven people, but they also have the skills to be able to navigate that so that the client who's living with dementia still feels good about themselves and feels like they're getting things done, which kind of brings me all back to my grandmother. And we took that away from her basically because there wasn't any other option. But
Right.
it's I see it over and over again. And then sometimes they're in a rush. I've been in a rush and they're like, Mom,
Right.
I had this happen yesterday. Mom, just stop. That person doesn't want to hear it because they've already heard the story 100 times. But to Mrs. Smith, it's the first time she's ever told it.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's not appropriate to empathize the people with dementia, but
Right.
it is somewhat like dealing with children, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just get frustrated and we're in a hurry and we're just like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm just going to do it for you because now
Yeah.
we're in a hurry. So let's get it done. And that's understandable. And so it's human nature. And none of us are ever going to be perfect on this.
No. No.
Tell me a little bit more about how you've used this training and being a teacher for the Teepa Snow Positive Approach to Care in Comfort Keepers and how much training your caregivers get in regard to this.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, we're rolling out a whole certification program that Comfort Keepers as a whole built. So, we already have that curriculum built, and I'm going to roll that out. In addition, I have offered the Teepa Snow Champion certifications within the walls of the Comfort Keepers and also outward to couple of organizations.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the benefit of having that is less caregiver burnout and more understanding and elevating not only just the caregivers and their skills, but elevating the clients as a result. And that is our entire brand. Is we in our care plans, we literally have, how did you elevate your client's spirit today? And that is what we're looking for. It's the whole person, right? You go to the hospital, you get treated, you get bandaged up, you come home. There's a lot of other things that need to happen. And that includes helping to communicate what needs to happen next in the way they can understand it. And then the caregivers not feeling so stressed out either and being able to walk in and help them through their day. It's easier for everybody. And this training that I got from Teepa Snow, I have watched it change the interaction between the caregiver or the family and the ability for mom to stay home, maybe not forever, but for another year or 2 years, because we were able to find that middle road and to use those tools. And it really isn't about the person living with dementia. It's about us adapting to where they're at and figuring out what they still can do on their own and helping them with those things to increase their self-esteem. So it is an absolute desire of mine to bring this to more people. When I mention Teepa Snow, people always light up because they know who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a whole training program that she recertifies people. So we continue to do that. I just talked with a caregiver about how to approach a client. We take care of couples a lot, husbands and wives, and watch the caregiver, observe the caregiver. And again, she's not doing anything wrong, but her go-to to talk to is the husband because he's able to communicate with her what we would call normally, right? I say something, you say something, right? They get that pattern. But when she comes in, she was not really getting the wife, she was not really talking to her directly or touching her in any way. I said, when you walk in, I want you to say hi and sit down next to her. Put your hand out, like the handshake. I did that. She put her hand right in my hand and we talked and she giggled. And a couple days before that, she was yelling at the caregiver because she probably doesn't feel seen.
Right.
Because the caregiver's not doing anything wrong. She just wants to get her breakfast made and all these other things that need to get done.
Right. No, it's task oriented. It's done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember in my mom's last days, I had brought the kids down and they were all just playing in front of her. And I was sitting down next to her and holding her hand. I have no idea whether she recognized all of us, but she had that positive feeling. And so she wasn't non-communicable, but she would verbalize things and it was gibberish, but you could still tell that she was happy because, I would see her watching the kids And every once in a while she was smiling the whole time. And every once in a while she'd look at me and wink, you know, and
Aw.
it was just one of those things where you can't always express communication through words.
Right.
Times it's more about touch, it's more about connection and all of that. So what as we wrap things up here, what takeaways would you want to leave our audience based on our discussion?
So I definitely, we didn't touch on too much of this, but in terms of bringing someone home from the hospital,
Mhm.
and again, I understand I own a business where we take care of people, but really I would be there in the room when they're doing the discharge planning. And also for those people that don't know, they could say it's today and it's not today. It could be tomorrow, but have that plan ready to go for when they come home. And also make sure you're managing their medications so they're not trying to figure that out on their own. There's a lot of
Absolutely.
blood pressure medications that should not be mixed and things like that.
Right.
Always include your follow-ups with your primary care. In terms
And
of
ask
yeah,
questions, are we
yes,
still supposed to have this medication? Because when you go to the hospital, sometimes they give you additional medications. And we had this conversation with a doctor on the podcast recently, and he said doctors sometimes are just deferential to the previous doctor. So if they have
correct.
and so the hospital doctor, prescribes this stuff and nobody takes it away when it was really only supposed to be temporary when they're in the hospital. And so it's really important that families and caregivers ask those questions. Are all these medicines still necessary?
Yeah. And to add one other thing, so the first 72 hours aren't just about getting home. They truly shape the entire recovery journey. And I think it's also important that families, I have a mom and a dad that are in their 80s, and it's hard to see them getting older. But if they came home from the hospital, I'd need to know, and because I'm in the shoes that I'm in and understand, it might take them, for every day you're in the hospital, it might take a week to get your strength back. And
Right.
just know that they may not be at that baseline that they were before, and they might never be. So we need to prepare for that short term and long term, and know that they may need some care for a while, and they may be able to get rid of the care, but they're never going to return home from the hospital and be good as new. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much. We've been talking with Lydia White, co-owner and client care director of Comfort Keepers, serving Bloomfield Hills, Farmington Hills, Howell, and Rochester Hills. Really great conversation. I very much appreciate it, Lydia.
Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate you and all that you're doing.
If you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to Advice from Your Advocates. You can find us on any place that you listen to podcasts. You can also listen to the podcast on our website, which is mannorlawgroup.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, visit mannorlawgroup.com.